It was a typical day. My daughter, with her contagious laughter, filled the house with joy. Nothing unusual, just the sound of a young girl living her life to the fullest despite the challenges she faced. But that afternoon, everything changed. The laughter that echoed from our living room, innocent, carefree, was heard across the street. And that's when the doorbell rang. Standing at the door was Karen, the infamous HOA member known for causing trouble. Her face, contorted with anger, wasn't just another petty complaint. This time, it was different. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You need to control that noise. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." I thought it was just another one of her ridiculous threats. But then, she crossed the line. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "If she doesn't stop laughing, I'll burn this place down." I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Could this really be happening? Over a laugh? What would happen next would push me to the edge, forcing me to make decisions I never thought I'd have to make. Stay with me, because what came after was unimaginable. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place that was supposed to be our sanctuary. The kind of place where the days were peaceful, the streets lined with trees, and the sound of children playing echoed in the distance. My daughter, Lily, was my world. She was 10 years old, full of laughter, and possessed a kind of innocence that could light up even the darkest rooms. Lily had been born with a condition that made things difficult for her. She struggled to walk and had trouble speaking clearly at times, but none of that ever stopped her from being her vibrant, joyful self. Her laughter was the kind that would make everyone around her smile, no matter how hard their day had been. She didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change for her. Then, there was Karen. She wasn't someone we'd considered a threat. At first, she seemed like just another neighbor, a woman in her mid-50s, stern and unapproachable, known for her self-imposed authority over the neighborhood. As a member of the HOA, she had a reputation for making petty complaints about everything, from lawn care to the placement of trash cans. Her presence, however, had always been more of an inconvenience than a real danger. Our house was always a haven for laughter, love, and light, but Karen saw it differently. Her sharp eyes were quick to judge and slow to understand. To her, Lily's carefree joy was nothing but an annoyance, a disturbance to the perfect order she so desperately tried to impose on the community. What started as a nuisance soon escalated into something far darker, a confrontation that would test my patience, my resolve, and my love for my daughter. The once quiet neighborhood was no longer just a backdrop for family gatherings and simple pleasures. It had become a battleground, one that neither I nor my daughter ever expected. At first, it was subtle. A few strange glances here and there. At the park, Karen would pass by and shoot us a look, one of those disapproving stares that lingered longer than necessary. I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just her usual cold demeanor. But soon, those glances turned into something more. It started when Lily and I were playing in the backyard one sunny afternoon. The neighborhood was calm, the birds chirping, and the sound of children laughing echoed through the open air. Lily was on the swing, her giggles rising into the warm breeze, her joy so innocent and pure that it could make anyone smile. But not Karen. I saw her standing at her window, her silhouette barely visible behind the drawn curtains. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence that she was looking our way. But as the days went on, I started noticing a pattern. Whenever Lily would laugh a little too loudly, Karen would be watching from her window. Every time we spoke or played near the backyard, Karen was there, peering over the fence or through her window, her cold eyes never straying far from us. Then came the first complaint. A letter from the HOA, posted in our mailbox one Thursday morning. It was the usual thing, an anonymous warning about noise disturbances. But this one had an added note at the bottom: "Your daughter's laughter is becoming an issue. Please keep it down." I couldn't believe what I was reading. My daughter, the one who had every right to laugh and play, was being scolded for simply existing in a way that brought joy to the world. I remember holding the letter in my hands, staring at it, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and anger. The first thought that crossed my mind was that it was just Karen being Karen, overbearing and unreasonable as usual. But the next time Lily laughed a little too loud, I saw Karen standing at her fence, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her eyes narrowed as if she were waiting for the right moment to pounce. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard to forget the way her gaze lingered on us. A few days later, the complaints escalated. It wasn't just letters anymore. Karen started walking by our house more frequently. Each time, she'd glance at us, muttering something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, cold and full of judgment. Then, the whispers started. I'd be out at the mailbox or chatting with a neighbor, and I'd hear people talk in hushed tones about us. "Did you hear about the family on Maple Street?" they'd say, always casting furtive glances our way. It was never anything overt, but the undertones were clear. People began avoiding us, casting side-eye glances like we were the problem, like we were the ones disturbing the peace. The only disturbance I could hear was the one coming from Karen, the one she was spreading across the neighborhood like a disease. Things continued to build. I tried to keep the peace, ignoring Karen's actions as best as I could, but she was relentless. I could feel her presence every time I stepped outside. One day, she even approached me while I was walking Lily to the car. "Maybe it's time you teach her some discipline," she said, her voice laced with venom. "I'm sure the neighbors don't appreciate the noise." I stared at her, speechless. What could I say to that? This was no longer about noise. It was about control. Karen wasn't upset by the volume, she was upset by our existence, by the way my daughter's laughter shattered the dull silence of her world. She was threatened by the way Lily could find joy in a world that had so little of it, and that scared her. And so the days passed, each one adding more weight to the growing tension between us. It was always the same, Karen's presence like a shadow in the corner of my vision, her eyes watching us with suspicion. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go to silence us. That's when the first real confrontation happened. It was a Saturday morning, the sun barely risen, and Lily was in the backyard, her laughter ringing out as she played with her dollhouse. It was a sound I had grown to love, a reminder that despite everything, my daughter was still filled with hope and joy. But Karen didn't see it that way. I heard the familiar sound of footsteps on the gravel. I turned around to find Karen walking towards our house, her face twisted in anger. She didn't even knock. She didn't need to. She just walked right up to the porch, her eyes glaring at me with contempt. "That's enough," she said, her voice low but unmistakable. "You need to make her stop. If you don't, I'll make sure she never laughs again. I will burn this house down, and no one will care. You've been warned." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood frozen on the porch, my heart racing. The world around me seemed to slow as the reality of her threat set in. Was this really happening? Over a laugh? Over my daughter's happiness? I had known Karen to be unreasonable, but this was something else. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It wasn't about noise or disruption. It was personal. And I realized, in that moment, that things had crossed a line we could never come back from. The day had started like any other. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and Lily was outside, laughing as she played with her favorite dollhouse in the backyard. Her joy, her innocent laughter, echoed across the yard, pure, unburdened. I had always loved hearing her laugh, the sound filling the house with a warmth that made everything seem right. But today, something was different. It was still early morning, and I had just stepped out to check the mail when I noticed her. Karen. Standing at the corner of our yard, just beyond the fence, her eyes fixed on us with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't just watching, she was waiting. I tried to ignore her, focusing on Lily's laughter as she continued to play. The sound was familiar, comforting even, but in that moment, I could feel the tension building. Karen's presence had become a constant shadow in our lives, one I could never shake off. It had been weeks since she started her little crusade against us, and I had tried my best to ignore her irrational complaints. But this felt different. Then it happened. I heard the sharp sound of footsteps crunching against the gravel, and I turned just in time to see her marching toward us. There was no warning, no knock, just the unmistakable sound of Karen's heavy footsteps as she crossed the yard with a determined stride. My heart raced, my body went tense, something in me knew this moment was coming. I just wasn't prepared for it. Enough. Karen's voice rang out, cutting through the morning air with a fury I had never seen before. She didn't give me a chance to respond. She just stormed right up to me, her eyes burning with rage, her face flushed red with anger. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued playing, her laughter ringing out once again. I could see Karen's expression twist, the sound of my daughter's happiness almost visibly grating on her nerves. The calm morning atmosphere that had once felt like home now felt suffocating, as though the air had thickened with the weight of what was about to unfold. "You need to make her stop," Karen spat, her voice trembling with indignation. "That noise is unacceptable. You've been warned over and over again, and you still let her laugh like this? You're disturbing the whole neighborhood." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Karen, my daughter isn't doing anything wrong. She's a child, and she's just, I don't care," she shouted, her voice growing louder, more erratic. "This has gone on long enough. If you don't make her stop right now, I'll make sure you regret it. I'll make sure she can never laugh again." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, the air around us suddenly growing unbearably thick. Her words were no longer about noise complaints or neighborhood rules. This was something more sinister, something deeply personal. The anger in Karen's eyes wasn't just about the noise, it was about control, about dominance. She wasn't angry because Lily was laughing too loud, she was angry because Lily had the audacity to be joyful in her world of perfection and order. And she wanted to silence it. I stepped forward, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You can't control my daughter, Karen. You don't have the right to tell us how to live our lives." She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling into a sneer. "I don't care about your rights," she hissed. "If you don't shut her up, if you don't make her stop laughing, I will burn this house down. I'll make sure it's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The threat wasn't just an idle remark, it was real. The weight of it settled on my shoulders, a crushing burden that seemed to cut through me. I could hear Lily's laughter in the background, still unaware of the storm brewing around her. But I was no longer listening to her laughter, I was listening to Karen's words, replaying them in my mind, trying to make sense of them. "Burn my house down?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper, the shock of her words still ringing in my ears. Karen nodded, her expression grim, her eyes filled with something darker than anger, something that felt almost like malice. "You heard me," she said, her tone final, as if the matter was settled. "I will make sure you pay the price for your disrespect. This neighborhood doesn't tolerate your kind. Your daughter doesn't belong here." I glanced over at Lily, still sitting on the swing, her back to us, her laughter still filling the air. She had no idea what was happening, no idea that the woman who had been quietly tormenting us for weeks had just escalated things to a level I never thought possible. I couldn't let her see the fear in my eyes, couldn't let her know that the world she thought was safe was suddenly so much more dangerous than it had ever been. The intensity of Karen's threat hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating everything around us. I could feel the blood rush to my ears, my pulse quickening as I tried to process what had just been said. I had heard of people being unreasonable, of petty arguments turning into something worse, but this? This was different. This was a woman willing to destroy everything I had, just because she couldn't stand to hear my daughter's laughter. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, what to do. The shock had rendered me speechless. And in that silence, Karen took a step back, her face twisting into a triumphant smile, as if she had won some sort of victory. "I'll be watching," she said, her words dripping with menace. "And I'll make sure this ends one way or another." With that, she turned on her heel and marched away, her footsteps echoing in the distance as she disappeared behind her fence. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. The weight of her threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, overshadowing everything else. I wanted to run after her, confront her, demand she take back her words. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She was determined, and she was powerful in ways I hadn't yet realized. I took a deep breath and turned back to Lily, who was still on the swing, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. I walked over to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lily, honey, let's go inside, okay?" She smiled at me, a smile so pure and full of joy that it nearly broke my heart. "Okay, Mommy," she chirped, hopping off the swing without a care in the world. But as we walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had just shifted beneath us. Karen had crossed a line, and I knew, deep down, that things would never be the same. The war had begun, and there was no turning back now. The door clicked shut behind me, but it felt as though the world was still wide open, full of uncertainty, fear, and something darker I couldn't quite grasp. My hand trembled as I locked the door, securing it as if that would somehow protect us from the storm that had just been unleashed. Karen's words echoed in my mind, each syllable sinking deeper into my chest. "I will burn this house down." I could still hear her voice, cold and cutting, as if it were still alive in the room with us. I didn't know what to feel. I was angry, yes, but I was also terrified. My whole body was shaking, not just from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt like betrayal. How could anyone, do this to another human being? To threaten a child, to destroy a family's home over something as pure as laughter? It felt impossible. It felt unreal. Lily was sitting on the couch, her legs crossed beneath her, her face alight with a smile as she watched her favorite show. To her, it was just another day. She didn't know what had happened outside, didn't know that the world she loved so much, the world where she could be free to laugh, to be herself, was under threat. She didn't know that Karen had turned the joy of her laughter into a weapon, something vile that would haunt us both for the foreseeable future. I watched her, trying to keep the smile on my face, but it was difficult. My stomach churned with fear. I wanted to hold her, to protect her from everything and everyone who could hurt her, but I also felt this strange sense of guilt. How could I let something like this happen? How could I let Karen, of all people, come into our lives and threaten us so viciously? This wasn't just a petty argument about noise. It was something deeper, something that reached into the heart of who we were. And it terrified me. As I sat there, staring at Lily, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the threat itself. It wasn't the idea that Karen might destroy our home, it was the realization that Karen had already begun to destroy something far more precious, our peace, our sense of security. What kind of world did we live in where a child's laughter wasn't safe? Where I, as a mother, had to fear for the safety of my own home just because someone couldn't stand the sound of joy? My mind kept going over the incident, replaying the words Karen had said over and over again. "I'll burn this house down." That threat wasn't just a wild outburst, it was a calculated declaration of power, a message that she was willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control over this neighborhood. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept trying to rationalize it, to understand it, but the truth was, there was no rationalizing it. Karen wasn't someone who could be reasoned with. She wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was a force that had, in a single moment, turned our world upside down. In the days that followed, things only got worse. The tension between us and the rest of the neighborhood grew thicker, almost tangible. I could feel the eyes of the neighbors on us whenever we stepped outside, their glances sharp and judgmental. I had always thought of our neighborhood as a safe haven, a place where we could raise our family in peace. But now, every corner felt like a battlefield. I felt the weight of Karen's threat hanging over us, always present, always looming. Lily could sense it too. She wasn't old enough to understand the full gravity of what was happening, but children are perceptive, and she knew something was wrong. She started asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why don't the neighbors say hi anymore, Mom? Why is Karen always looking at us like that? Her voice, so innocent, so full of confusion, broke my heart each time. I wanted to shield her from the world, to keep her in her bubble of safety where nothing could hurt her. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't protect her from the reality of people like Karen, from the cruelty that sometimes exists in the world. I spent nights lying awake, my mind racing. I thought about what Karen had said, about her threat, and I felt a deep, gnawing anger. How dare she? How dare she threaten my daughter's happiness, her safety, her very existence? I had worked so hard to build a life for us, to create a place where we could be ourselves, where Lily could grow up without fear. And now that was all in jeopardy because of one person's unreasonable hatred. But more than anger, there was fear. Fear that Karen might actually follow through on her words. Fear that we wouldn't be able to protect ourselves. I knew that Karen wasn't just a problem to be solved with logic or reason. She had made it clear that she would do whatever it took to maintain control over this neighborhood, even if it meant destroying my family in the process. In the days that followed, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her turn my daughter's laughter into something that needed to be silenced. But what could I do? What power did I have against someone who was willing to go this far? I began to search for answers, to reach out to anyone who could help, lawyers, neighbors who might be willing to stand up against Karen, anyone who could help us fight back. The stress was starting to take its toll on me. I couldn't focus on anything else. I stopped enjoying the little things, the things that used to bring me peace. Every time I heard Lily laugh, a part of me tensed up, waiting for Karen to come charging over, ready to make good on her threat. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Lily. I couldn't let her see me break. I couldn't let her see the fear I was feeling. As a mother, I had to be strong for her, even if every fiber of my being wanted to curl up and hide from the world. One evening, after another long day of tension and unease, I sat with Lily in the living room. She had just finished one of her favorite shows, and her face was lit up with a smile. She was so carefree, so unaware of the storm that had been brewing around us. I smiled back, though my heart felt heavy. "You know, Lily," I said, my voice soft but steady, "you can laugh as loud as you want. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." Her eyes lit up with excitement. "Really, Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with innocence and wonder. "Really," I said, the words coming out stronger than I felt. "Your laughter is the most beautiful sound in the world. Never let anyone tell you to stop." In that moment, I realized something: Karen had already lost. She could threaten our home, she could try to destroy our peace, but she could never take away the one thing that truly mattered. Our love for each other. Our resilience. Our ability to find joy in the smallest moments. No matter what Karen did, she would never be able to silence that. And that gave me the strength to move forward. The road ahead would be difficult, and Karen would not back down easily. But I knew, deep down, that we would fight back, not just for our home, but for everything that made us who we were. For Lily. For the right to laugh freely. For the right to exist in a world that didn't make us hide who we were. The battle had only just begun, but I was ready. The days that followed Karen's threat felt like a twisted game of cat and mouse. While I spent sleepless nights worrying about what might come next, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't just sit back and wait for Karen to act on her promise. I had to know more about her. I had to understand why she had done this to us, and if there was something deeper lurking beneath her angry exterior. So, I began my investigation. It started with small, innocent inquiries, casual conversations with our neighbors. At first, I was hesitant. Karen had already managed to make us feel isolated from the rest of the community, and I wasn't sure how many people would be willing to speak against her. But I had to try. I had to know what was really going on. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Hawkins, an older woman who lived a few houses down. She had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else and had always been friendly, albeit a bit reserved. She was out watering her plants when I decided to approach her. "Hey, Mrs. Hawkins," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you happen to know what's going on with Karen lately? She's been, well, really angry about a lot of things." Mrs. Hawkins looked at me for a moment, her weathered hands pausing in their task. She glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice, as if making sure no one was listening. "I'm not surprised you're asking," she said. "Karen's always been a bit of a problem. I don't know if you've noticed, but she's gotten worse over the past few months. It's like something snapped in her, and she's been impossible to reason with." That was the first hint. "Worse? How do you mean?" Mrs. Hawkins hesitated before replying, her face growing darker. "Well, I don't know all the details, but I do know that she's been fighting with people over every little thing. Last month, she got into a big argument with the Joneses down the street over their fence. It got ugly, and I think it's just. I don't know, it's like she's been losing control." I pressed further, asking if she had any idea why Karen might have been so agitated. Mrs. Hawkins glanced around nervously again and leaned in closer. "I heard something about her daughter," she whispered. "She doesn't talk about it much, but it seems like her daughter's been in and out of trouble. I don't know the details, but I think it's been weighing on Karen. She hasn't been the same since. It's like she's got this pent-up anger. Maybe that's why she's been so hard to deal with." The mention of Karen's daughter hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never known much about Karen's family. She kept to herself, and aside from the occasional run-in at neighborhood meetings, we had never had a reason to get close. But now, it felt like a missing puzzle piece had just fallen into place. Was this about more than just a noise complaint? Had Karen's behavior been tied to something personal, something deeper than I had realized? I thanked Mrs. Hawkins for the information and promised to be careful in my dealings with Karen. But inside, my mind was racing. If Karen was dealing with something personal, if her anger was rooted in some unresolved issue, then maybe there was a way to get through to her. Maybe I could appeal to her as a mother, not just as a neighbor. But as I turned to walk back home, another thought struck me. If her daughter was causing her this much stress, was it possible that Karen had been taking it out on the wrong people, people like us? The next day, I took a walk down to the community center, where Karen occasionally volunteered. It was a good place to gather more information and maybe find some way to speak with her more directly. I didn't have any grand plan, I just wanted to understand her better, figure out what made her tick. I found Karen in the break room, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. She was staring out the window, looking distant. There was something almost sad in the way she sat, but I knew I couldn't let that cloud my judgment. I needed answers, and I had to be strategic. I walked in slowly, trying not to startle her. "Karen?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing at first, but then softening just slightly when she saw who it was. "What is it?" she asked, her voice stiff but not unfriendly. "I wanted to understand what's going on," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I know there's been some tension between us, but I don't think we're really seeing eye to eye. I'd like to understand why. What's really bothering you?" Karen looked at me for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. For a brief moment, I thought she might shut down, but then she sighed deeply and set her coffee down. "It's not just about the noise," she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. It's everything. Everything has been spiraling out of control. My daughter, she's been in and out of rehab for the last year, and I can't keep up anymore. She keeps making the same mistakes, over and over, and I'm powerless to stop it. And every time I see someone living in peace, laughing, enjoying their life, it reminds me of everything I've lost. There it was, the real reason behind her anger. It wasn't just the noise, it wasn't just us. Karen had been hurting, and it was all coming out in destructive ways. Her daughter's troubles had consumed her, leaving her bitter and resentful. And now, she was taking it out on everyone around her. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice softening. "I had no idea. But you can't just go around threatening people because you're hurting. You can't lash out like that. I'm trying to protect my daughter, too, and I won't let anyone threaten us." Karen looked away, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't speak. I realized, in that moment, that it wasn't just Karen I was dealing with, it was a woman on the edge, a woman who had lost control over her own life and now didn't know how to reclaim it. "I don't want to fight with you," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I need you to stop. For your sake, for mine, for everyone's sake. We need to find a way to live together in peace, not tear each other apart." Karen didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the room without another word. I left the community center with more questions than answers. It seemed like Karen's anger was born of something deep within her, something she hadn't been able to deal with. But that didn't change the fact that she had crossed a line. And now, more than ever, I had to decide how far I was willing to go to protect my family. Would I keep trying to find a peaceful resolution, or would I take more drastic steps? One thing was clear, Karen wasn't just a crazy neighbor anymore. She was a broken person, and her brokenness had turned into a dangerous force. And as much as I wanted to help her, I knew I had to protect Lily first. That meant the next steps weren't going to be easy, and they were certainly not going to be peaceful. The tension had been building for weeks. Every moment, every glance, every whispered word had pushed us closer to this inevitable confrontation. But now, it was no longer about mere words. It wasn't about noise complaints or a simple misunderstanding. This was a fight for our safety, for our peace, for our very right to exist without fear. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the neighborhood, I made up my mind. I was done being intimidated. Done being silent. Karen had threatened my family, threatened my daughter, and I had spent too long just waiting for something to happen. But tonight, it was time to confront her, to make her understand that no one could tear apart what we had built, not without a fight. I grabbed my jacket, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. Each step felt heavy, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, but there was no turning back now. Karen's house was just a few doors down. As I approached, I saw her silhouette through the window, standing near the kitchen. My nerves were on edge, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. For Lily. For our family. When I reached her front door, I didn't hesitate. I knocked sharply, my fist pounding against the wood. The sound echoed in the stillness of the evening, reverberating like the storm that had been brewing between us for so long. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and there she was, Karen, her face flushed with the same anger and frustration that had become all too familiar. But this time, something in her eyes had changed. There was no smug satisfaction, no superiority in her expression. This time, she looked almost afraid. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice sharp. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I took a step forward, my gaze fixed on hers. "You threatened my family," I said, my voice steady but filled with an intensity that matched the fire burning in my chest. "You threatened my daughter. And now, you'll pay the price for it." Her eyes widened, her jaw tightening as she realized the seriousness in my words. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered, her usual confidence slipping away. I was upset." "No," I interrupted, my voice growing firmer, louder. "You crossed a line, Karen. You made a choice to threaten us, to destroy our peace, just because you couldn't stand to see someone else happy. You don't get to do that. Not to my daughter. Not to me." I could see her hands trembling at her sides. She took a step back, as if trying to retreat into her house, but I blocked her way, standing tall, forcing her to face me. The anger I had felt for so long, the anger at her cruelty, at her manipulation, came rushing forward. "You've spent so much time trying to control everything around you, trying to break everyone who doesn't fit into your perfect little world," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "But you can't control us. You can't control my daughter's laughter, and you sure as hell can't control our lives." Her eyes flicked down to the ground, her fists clenching and unclenching at her sides. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking. I've been so lost, and I don't know how to fix it. I thought if I made you stop, maybe it would fix everything. Maybe it would make me feel better." I saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the cracks in her facade. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. But I quickly shook it off. I couldn't let her manipulation take hold of me anymore. "I'm sorry you're struggling, Karen," I said, my voice softening slightly, but still firm. "But that doesn't give you the right to hurt us. You can't fix your problems by destroying other people's lives. And you certainly don't get to threaten my daughter's safety." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Karen's face was flushed, her breath ragged as she tried to process my words. But I didn't back down. I stood my ground, knowing that this moment would define everything from here on out. "I'm done being afraid of you," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "You don't get to control us anymore, Karen. I'm taking back my life. And if you ever threaten us again, if you ever come near my family again with that kind of hate, I won't hesitate to take action." For the first time, I saw something shift in Karen's expression. She looked defeated. It wasn't the smug satisfaction I had seen before. It wasn't the anger or the bitterness. It was the realization that she had lost control, that she had pushed too far and could no longer intimidate me. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice small. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just angry. I didn't soften. Not yet. I had given her enough chances." "Well, you've hurt us, Karen. And now you need to live with the consequences of your actions." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Karen stood frozen, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her anger and regret had finally become too much to bear. I could see that her facade was cracking, the walls she had built around herself crumbling. Finally, she stepped back, her eyes avoiding mine. "I never meant for it to go this far," she muttered, more to herself than to me. I nodded, taking a step away. "I hope you'll think about that," I said quietly. "For your sake, and for everyone else's." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't over yet, not completely. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of relief. The battle wasn't won, but I had taken the first step in standing up for my family. And I wasn't going to stop now. The weeks that followed my confrontation with Karen were quiet, almost too quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, the neighborhood seemed to exhale, as if holding its breath had finally come to an end. There was no more lurking tension in the air, no more whispers behind closed doors. But that didn't mean the battle had been won completely. It had been a moment of change, but not a full resolution. Karen didn't show her face around the neighborhood much after our confrontation. The last time I saw her, she was packing up her car, preparing to move away. I didn't know exactly where she was going, and honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do. I had stood up for my daughter, for my family, and for our right to live without fear. In that moment, I had regained control over my life, and that was something no one could take from me. But even though Karen was gone, the emotional scars she had left behind were still there. It wasn't just about the threat she had made, it was the fear, the unease, the constant sense of being on edge that had pervaded every aspect of our lives. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen might come back, that her anger would resurface in some form. But as time went on, those fears began to fade. Life slowly began to return to normal. Lily, ever the optimist, had moved on much quicker than I had. To her, the whole ordeal had felt like a distant memory, just another thing that happened in the world of grown-ups. She didn't understand the weight of the situation, but I could see it in the way she started to laugh freely again, without fear, without hesitation. Her joy was no longer tainted by the shadow of Karen's cruelty. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. I knew that I had made the right choice by standing up to Karen. There were moments, though, when I questioned whether I had done enough. Could I have helped her more? Could I have reached her, helped her find peace without having to drive her away? But I realized that, in that moment, I had done what was necessary. Sometimes, standing up for what's right means making difficult decisions, even if they come at a personal cost. The real change came in the way I viewed myself. Before that day, I had always been the quiet one, the one who tried to keep the peace, who avoided conflict at all costs. But now, I knew I had the strength to fight for my family. I had the power to stand up for what was right, even when the world around me seemed intent on tearing us down. As the months passed, the community began to heal. The tension lifted, and I found myself engaging with my neighbors again, though cautiously. The support we received from those who had stood by us was invaluable, and it reminded me of the power of community. But more than that, it was a reminder of how important it was to stand up for each other. To fight for the ones we love. To protect our peace, even when it feels like the world is pushing back. Looking back, I knew that everything had changed. Not just for Karen, not just for me, but for our entire neighborhood. What happened with Karen was a turning point. It was a painful reminder that there are people in this world who will try to destroy your peace, your happiness, and your joy. But it was also a reminder of the strength we have inside us when we fight for what's right. And as I sat on the porch one evening, watching Lily play in the yard with a carefree smile on her face, I realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, nothing could break the bond we shared. Our family was stronger now. The love and laughter that had been threatened were only more powerful for having been fought for. No matter what happened, we had stood together, and that was a victory I would hold on to forever. If you've ever faced a situation where your family's peace was threatened, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your story, and let's start a conversation. We all have the power to stand up for what's right, no matter the challenge. Don't let fear silence you, your voice matters. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content that empowers us all to fight for the things that truly matter. Together, we can make a difference.